Hi everyone, this is Joey Remenyi from seekingbalance.com.au. Today I have got two guests with me. They're fellow Australians. I want to introduce to you Teena Mogler and Hughes. They come from the Divergent Dialogues podcast, and you can find them on Substack. So welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about something that I believe is a deeply human concept and topic. And the topic is masking or camouflaging or compensating. And we're talking about, questioning in the most gentle way. When am I really leaving myself and not being authentic and belonging in myself as I am in my nature? And when am I subtly augmenting myself, distorting, adapting, modifying my behaviors to keep up appearances and blend in, fit in, or serve some kind of purpose? And there's no right or wrong answers here. I think this conversation is a really, really important part of the rock steady process of coming home to oneself. And for me, really, of having more skills and tools and language for staying in the body and being true to who I am more often in the day, in the week. So some of the key words we're going to be talking about center on masking. And I came across this language as I researched neurodivergence. If you don't identify with being neurodivergent, I really want to invite you to keep listening because this is for all of us. But there is a lot we can learn from neurodivergent people and neurodivergent research. And I feel like masking is one of those areas where there's a lot to offer. So Teena and Caitlin, you can fight it out between you who starts off the conversation, but you're both social workers. You work in sort of counseling therapeutic contexts with clients, helping them understand themselves, helping them celebrate themselves and be in the world in a really holistic way. Where does masking come into these conversations? Do you want to just start with what is masking?
Happy for me to go, Teena?
Yep, take it away.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Joey. And I think you gave a really good overview of masking. So in essence, masking is something that people do in order to fit in. I guess it's a social strategy for a lot of people. And I think unfortunately, some people grow up like neurodivergent, whether or not they really know it. But they start getting a lot of feedback around how they express themselves and communicate and relate to others. And sometimes that's really negative feedback and can result in like bullying and exclusion and those sorts of things. So I guess masking is employed as a strategy in order to fit in and appear normal. And I think it starts really young. I think
was quote unquote normal, by the way, for listeners who
quote unquote normal. Yeah.
There is no normal here. Your normal is your normal, and we give you full permission to rock that normal. Nobody else is normal. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, I guess it starts really young when, I mean, honestly, probably around late primary school, early high school. I think that's when those more complex social relationships start to form. And I guess it just kind of compounds from there. So yeah, so I guess Teena, what's your, I guess, take on masking?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what you've both just said. With that starting in primary school, early teens, like my own children are neurodivergent, and my daughter, she's just gone into grade 7, and all through grade 6, she was absolutely positive that she was going to be Prime Minister one day. She found out a friend of mine with a similar age child also wanted to be Prime Minister. And all of a sudden, it was just a competition between these two and in her own mind. But then at the end of grade 6, they did a big presentation, to farewell them. And her little poster thing said, that her favorite subject was PE and that she wanted to be an interior designer. And I was blown away by this because I'm like, that's not my daughter. And, you know, exploring that with her, it was like a masking strategy because trying to fit in, and it might not be masking so much in that very neurodivergent common space that, you know, in common masking strategies that we see, but it certainly was a masking strategy that a young person uses trying to fit in and just be a part of the group because she didn't want to be, you know, a nerd, so to speak.
Yeah. I was going to say it's also those interests, because neurodivergent folks tend to have those quirky interests, and then it becomes socially unacceptable to others. So then they'll change their interest to align with, I guess, the mainstream.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to add on to this story is, you know, what happens to us biologically when there's repeated actions of leaving our authentic self and putting on this pretend veneer mask. I mean, it really is a good turn of phrase. And, you know, what happens in our body, what happens in our mind-body connection, what happens at that soul existential level. And I think this can be like the very, very subtle forms of trauma where it's like the microaggressions, even
Yeah.
complicit in it, and we're choosing at that point in time, or not necessarily, it can be unconscious, subconscious, absolutely, probably mostly it is. And that's part of what this podcast today is about. It's about looking at when are we unconsciously or subconsciously faking it, pretending, pushing through, adding on a few layers that perhaps is extra baggage we don't need. So I guess what I'm moving towards is our nervous system, which my listeners are happy to comfortable to talk about. It knows when we move away from our center and our alignment and our quote unquote truth. You know, we all have different truths at any point in time. And that can mean we can enter the fight, flight, freeze, fawn zones of regulation or dysregulation. And that can just add more neural processing to our day, which can lead to feeling exhausted, feeling fatigue that's inexplainable. You're like, I'm eating well, I love my job, I exercise, I'd like, why am I so tired? It can be these layers of micromasking, and it all adds up. I think a little bit is fine. It's a blip in the ocean, but when it becomes an actual persona that we embody on repeat, and it can be a bit addictive, I think it's a real process of unmasking and revealing who we really are. So does anybody feel confident or brave enough or have a fresh memory of some personal experience with masking and unmasking to get to give any concrete examples, or case studies as well would be fine?
I mean, I can't think of a case study off the top of my head, but it might come to me as I speak. Actually, no, I do. So, something that I always say to my clients is that masking is a choice, but it also comes at a cost. So it's a choice in the way that, you know, like neurodivergent folks and you know, non-neurodivergent folks, at some point in time, people may feel that they need to mask. So, for example, when you go to a job interview, you may feel that you need to portray a certain persona in order to get a particular job. There may be places and spaces where you feel that you can unmask more and be yourself, and that's safe. And for some people, it is a safety issue. For you know, a lot of different minority groups expressing themselves outwardly, it can be really dangerous for them. So they may feel that they have less of a choice. So, for example, I was talking with a client recently, and they were saying to me, I'm working full time. I'm coming home. When I come home, I am just completely exhausted. I've just got nothing left in the tank anymore. And we explored it a little bit. And essentially, they were masking highly all day, or every work day. And I was saying to them, that's part of why you're feeling so horrible and exhausted when you get home, is because you're not sitting in your authentic self, there's all of these extra mental processes you're having to go through. So your executive functioning is on double time, trying to portray this particular persona to other people. And that's common for a lot of the people that I work with. Unfortunately, they feel, particularly in professional spaces, educational spaces, and with some friends and family, depending where they're at in their journey of understanding themselves and their neurodivergence.
Or even, as I say, going back to this sort of neuro common ground, I think even people who do identify as neuronormative or neurotypical, we can lose ourselves in the groupthink and in the mainstream. And there's this individuation process of sort of having to at times go, this isn't working for me, whatever my choices are, which could be relationships, it could be careers, could be the place you live. Like there can be this sort of culture clash, and that's feeling very unsettled and exhaustive. I just wanted to clarify, I have spoken on my podcast about executive function, but just to clarify for new listeners, if I just think about my own lived experience, if I could sort of turn back the clock and slow everything down and explain how I think this feels for me in my inner world, I think it's almost as though if I'm in a social situation, which could even be a family barbecue, it's like my brain is collecting all this information about body language, facial gestures, topics and themes, mood, emotion. You know, my body is taking in all this information. I'm noticing who's got on odd socks. I'm taking it all in. Then there's this executive function. It's like the admin team of my brain, and it's a filter system. It's a prioritizing system. It's saying, nope, that's not useful. Yes, that one. And it's getting all this data and organizing it. The more I'm masking, actually, the more data that's getting in and needing to be organized. So it's an added layer for my admin team, which is exhausting. And I'm like, oh my God, that barbecue. And if I'm not in my body and listening to my felt sense, my emotional state, my topics and themes of interest that I actually want to talk about, if I'm in other people's stuff, it's much more processing, it's exhausting, it's less satisfying. I don't feel as emotionally or spiritually met. There's less contentment. So I walk away from the barbecue feeling like, God, why did I bother? I was just talking about football and nodding my head and going, yeah, how's the weather? Um, so just to sort of try and slow that down so we can see the added like the machinations of the brain. It's a lot more heady and there's a lot more juggling of many pieces of data if I'm in that masking zone. And essentially, I may choose to mask, even if it's subconsciously, to actually make other people feel more comfortable. Because if I was to dive into things that was really juicy for me and just feeling alive, it could actually be quite a deeply soulful conversation that would freak other people out. And then they're uncomfortable. So I may be protecting them emotionally, which is, of course, not my job. But Teena, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think that example of the barbecue, I think is a great one, because when you don't really understand or know that this, like, masking is something that you do, or if you don't really understand how you're doing it, it is really exhausting. And I mean, it's exhausting even when you do know you're doing it, but yeah, like social things are just really unsatisfying, and we can really turn that in on ourselves and become really critical of ourselves, because it's like, oh, you know, your friends put on this nice thing for you and you couldn't even be happy. And, you know, we had this great Christmas function with all the family, and you're still miserable. Like, we can really be quite harsh to ourselves for not enjoying these things, but, you know, like, not realizing why it was so exhausting. And yeah, I think that in those situations, I find that I mask quite a lot in the way that I'm a professional woman. I do well in my business. I do well academically, and people see me as this really together, capable, successful person. And in our society, in our culture, you're either one or the other. It's not okay to be brilliant in the workspace, but like just really struggle in the home or like the mum space, because I'm also a single mum of 3 kids. And so I find that for me, a really strong masking strategy that I do is pretending that I get it. If we're talking about my work stuff, like the brain, emotions, neurodivergence, research, I'm all over it, and it's hard to get a word in edgeways. But outside of that, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't really understand, especially like with humor, like jokes. It's just, I don't get it. But socially, you're only allowed to ask so many questions to clarify something before you're seen as interrogating or being argumentative. I can't count how many times I've been accused of like, why are you arguing with me about this? I'm like, oh, I'm not. I'm sorry. I still don't get it. I just had a few more questions to try and understand what you were trying to say. So I mask by not asking questions, pretending that I completely get it, and trying not to let anyone know that I'm not understanding. And like letting that mask go is challenging, because that there is that fine line between, I really don't want to pretend here because I want to get it, and I'm tired and drained by pretending that I know what the conversation's about. But I don't want to be argumentative or challenge people accidentally.
I feel like this takes us into the territory of just, not just, of reflecting and being more conscious about, who are our safe people, who are the communities and places. And, for not for everybody, but for some people that will actually be more one-on-one type
Yeah.
interactions, as opposed to the groups where there's lots of, actually everyone's kind of masking in groups, that creates the social cohesion. And I think ultimately this is sort of my dreaming space now, my imaginal space. But I think we're, as a human species, really working towards being more differentiated, being more individuated in really, really healthy ways, where we knock up against each other and our differences with curiosity, with healthy attunement. So there's not so much merging, groupthink, masking, camouflaging, compensating. But as a community, I think we've got a ways to go. And there is a lot of this subconscious, unconscious masking everywhere. Um, so yeah, thinking about, who are my safe people? How can I attract more of these people? And really that all comes back down to authenticity, that magic word of when I am more in my body, when I am more responsive to my actual nervous system, and when I am more in tune with the themes, topics, ideas, the stuff that lights me up and makes me feel alive and really gets that dopamine hit and serotonin, oxytocin, all the feel good chemicals,
Yeah.
that's authentically, genuinely bubbling and alive in my body. And for my rock steady listeners, this is our desired sensations and all this stuff we're exploring in our body. We're more likely actually to attract other people and understand when we might meet those people and how it feels to be around more of those people. So it's a space of exploration and growth, maybe a bit of courage thrown in. In your line of work, how do you support people to potentially navigate those new relationships, perhaps new sense of safety and belonging? Because I can imagine that's a real journey in and of itself.
Oh, it absolutely is. One of the things that I like to do with people that I'm working with is encouraging, like as a first step, obviously getting to know themselves and
Yeah.
what working out where do you want to make those changes to start with, because it is a personal journey. And like we've spoken about, sometimes masking is about helping us to feel safe. So finding where we want to make those changes and helping people get comfortable doing things differently. So the example I gave before about, not asking too many questions to help me understand. When I feel like, actually, no, I don't want to be doing this, having an awkward conversation and saying things that you wouldn't, typically say, like, hey, I'm really not getting it. Is it okay if I ask a whole bunch of questions because I want to understand? Is that all right? So, putting it out there to start with, that I don't want to be seen as argumentative or anything like that, interrogating. But I do really want to understand. So this is the way I do it. I ask loads of questions. Is that okay with you? Most of the time people are like, yeah, and they like that, I'm interested. And sometimes people are like, yeah, okay. And I can see that it's a little bit awkward. So just getting it a little bit comfortable with saying things different, having a different way of asking.
Yeah, psychological boundaries, is this okay?
Yeah.
This is what I'm thinking. How does that land for you? It's a great role modeling of cultivating conscious psychological boundaries. Caitlin,
Yeah.
I can see Caitlin's biting to.
Really? This is such a great conversation. I've just had so many things pop up. So I'm having to like kind of go, okay, focus, Caitlin. So something that really resonated with me, Joey, when you were talking before, was that word courage. And something that I have to remind myself when I'm working with my clients is that I'm asking them to be vulnerable. I'm asking them to be vulnerable with me, and I'm asking them to be vulnerable with others. And for a lot of my clients, they've experienced a lot of trauma, particularly in that social space. So I have to be really supportive around that and really understanding of that. And, for some people, they've had this mask for so long, and I can't ask them to just rip that mask off. And obviously, I want to support them to work towards that authenticity and that unmasking, but I have to respect their process and their pace, and really encourage them and say, look, this is brave. This takes courage, because a lot of people struggle to be vulnerable, especially when they've experienced trauma, because they're so afraid of being rejected.
Yes.
But I always say to them, I get it. It's so scary. But if you just hold on and persist, you're going to connect with people that you really are getting, you're talking about before, that kind of that flow, those conversations, that energy, that joy. And yeah, it's a bit of a journey, but you will get there, and it's so worth it.
Yeah, and I'm actually pinching, I think, your terminology here, Teena, off one of your podcasts, which are worth listening to, everyone, Divergent Dialogues, which is the psychological and physiological harm that comes if, in the long term, if we are keeping up this strong attachment and identity to some of those personas or shadow parts of ourselves that are not authentic. Did you want to speak to that psychological and physiological harm any further?
Yeah, so that is quite a consequence of masking, where when you are in that space constantly, you go to work, you go to school, whatever your day is, and you are wearing that mask all day long. You are so aware of everything you say and do, because you need to sort of keep it together. And then you come home and it's just, you don't have anything left for yourself. And
or we're actually also masking at home. There's that possibility too, that it's the double-edged sword, that we're sort of gaslighting ourselves and masking almost permanently, and we really, I would say some of my clients fall into this, and their body, because I work in the sensory realm and the symptomatology realm, that their body is starting to really express that physiological harm, that they now have symptom loops firing. And I think the journey of coming back to authenticity really does become quite life-saving and necessary.
Yes, absolutely. So you're right, like going home and then still masking, but in a different sort of way. It's really draining. And when we spend all day, every day, without a break, in varying states of high cortisol, our stress hormones, that does take its toll on our body. We get to a point where our baseline stress is actually really, really high, but we see that as, oh no, I'm feeling good. Things are going really well, but yet we're well off where we sort of want to be aiming for. Because we've become so accustomed to sitting in this state of stress and burnout. It affects our sleep, it affects our mood, it affects like all those really important parts of our personality. And it shifts who we are on, like, from a core sort of level, and getting back to that authentic version of ourselves, that it can be really, really challenging. People don't so much like it when we start to do things differently all of a sudden, whether it's be different about the way we're using our words, whether it's being more open about the struggles that we're having. Like that can be really confronting for the people around us. And some of the work that I do with my clients is, before we even get started, helping them recognize that we're going to do a lot of work to figure out, who you are and the way you want to be in this world. And that's going to feel great for you. But we also have to be prepared for the people around you to be uncomfortable and really push back on that.
And again, that's psychological boundaries, because other people's experience, their emotions, their opinions, their perceptions is actually not our work, not our job. And if we run around the world trying to make everybody else okay, which is that fawning, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, their protection, defense, survival mechanism, super, super healthy, but we don't want to be engaging in them all the time, every day. So again, those psychological boundaries of going, well, actually, this is my truth, this is my authenticity, and how that rubs off against other people is actually their work to go home and process, not mine.
Yeah, a client of mine, late diagnosed autistic person, working around unmasking and connecting with their authentic self and understanding these parts of themselves, had a partner who actually said to them, so are you going to act autistic now? Because they were essentially sort of unmasking and letting some of those parts out that they had previously kind of kept, like, oh, don't want to let my weird out, but getting comfortable and just like, actually, no, this is just who I am, and I'm pretty cool. But that was the response they had from a partner. So that's really uncomfortable.
And an edge of growth. There's nothing wrong with any of those conversations, and those comments can be really gracefully navigated, so we can keep coming
Yes.
back into this place of being met, being heard, being understood. I think those skills, as Caitlin said, of being vulnerable and having communication strategies and tools, and even the empathy clash business, like understanding that different people express themselves in different ways and would like to receive or give support in different ways. Having this toolkit to navigate all of those clunky, awkward edges where things I might say or do might actually genuinely, quote unquote, upset somebody else, but it's innocent. It's not an insensitivity. It's not intentional. What do we do with those? How can we have conversations that level the ground and maintain the connection, maintain the awareness, the friendship, the relationship. And I think that's all part of it, actually. And that's part of our humanity together on this planet, being differentiated and bumping up against each other.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Caitlin.
I was just, yeah. So I guess just taking a little bit of a side quest relevant, but I guess something that I talk to my clients about, much like Teena, is about through that process. Unfortunately, sometimes some connections may change or kind of drop off. But I guess what I really want people to understand, whether they're going through that journey of understanding themselves, or if they are like a loved one, or like a partner or a friend trying to understand their, neurodivergent person or loved one, is that long-term masking has serious impacts to mental health, and people can go to really dark places. And I think, like the comment that Teena said that her client's partner said, it's, that can be quite hurtful, because it's like, I'm being vulnerable, I'm showing you me, and you're kind of sounding a bit annoyed about that. And for some people, there may be certain behaviors or things that that can be a bit of a shift and a change, and maybe some things can be a little bit uncomfortable. But what they need to understand is, if that person can't be authentic in themselves, it is damaging them every single day. And it can have really harmful consequences to them and their mental health, and how they see themselves and feel about themselves.
And physical health. I think I'm seeing
Yes.
people at the end of the spectrum where the medical world can't do anything anymore. There are these chronic, elusive, invisible symptoms, which I prefer to call persistent sensations, that
Yeah.
are their inner sensory landscape is really neurologically alive. There's a lot of synapses pinging and ponging. It's on, it's on, it's on. And how can we come back more into that ventral vagal
Yeah.
optimal firing patterns more often? Safety, belonging, connection, authenticity. That's my rock steady journey and program that I support people through. I wanted to say there's something coming back, like bouncing off both of you. Caitlin mentioned, like, in our society, people like you to be just this thing. Like, if you're brilliant, you're brilliant. If you're social, you're social. Whereas the reality is we're multidimensional beings. And thinking back to myself, when I started to discover and be resonant with neurodivergence, I just gave myself more permission to, like, literally pick up a book and read it in a day. And it was like there was ways I was performing or doing things that I thought a mother should, or a partner or a wife, or and it was really, really subtle, but it's like, actually I'm feeling like just reading this book from front to back on the couch this afternoon, and really just letting myself geek out a bit and embrace more of my crazy scientist. And and there was a little bit of a and my husband's also, like, he's similar. We've got very similar ways of being in the world. But he did make a comment that was like, you're changing, or, I don't know how I feel about this. And I mean, it really did wash over me, because I think there was so much satisfaction and contentment and dopamine hitting, and just that leveling down of my bodily firing patterns,
Yeah.
that it's better for the whole family, that I actually do embrace some of that quirky, non-conventional ways of being in my daily life. Um, and the other thing is if what I wanted to sort of say, touching upon the multidimensionality, is just because some days, weeks, or months I may want to literally just read books, that doesn't mean I'm super introverted or antisocial or a bookworm. That could be a description of that behavior in that moment, but it's in relationship to where I am in my cycle. It's in relationship to how old my children are. And, there's so many relationships that are forming how I authentically respond. It doesn't define me as a static person. And so I think understanding that we're changing, we're cyclical, we're dynamic, we're all in relationship to everything else in this interconnected universe.
Yeah.
there's a real flexibility and expansion there that opens up possibility. And actually, it really shifts us out of judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you mentioned about getting back to that ventral vagal state. And when we think about drawing from like polyvagal theory, and they talk about starting where in that ventral vagal state and forming an idea of what are the things, the people, the sounds, the smells, what is it that's around you when you're in your ventral vagal state. And it can be all so vastly different, and that's okay. But yeah, our society likes us to be really easily defined, and it's like, well, to make you happy, you need A, B, and C. But the reality is that might only be at one part of the month. A different part of the month, I might need X, Y, and Z to feel happy. My daughter, like driving them to school, we often take turns of who's going to pick what music's on in the car. And sometimes I like to have a bit of Xavier Rudd playing. He's my secret husband. And other times I like to listen to lectures on the brain. And my daughter commented that that her friends had this conversation, and all their mums have these playlists that they play on the way to school. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And she said, yeah, I'm the only one that has to listen to brain lectures, but I think that makes me smarter, mum. And I'm like, maybe, I don't know. I once quoted Coolio in Gangster's Paradise in an essay that I did really well from. So, music helps.
I was just going to say that I guess a lot of the work that I do with my clients is identifying their needs and their wants, and I guess what they're doing, what makes them happy. And I think the more they align themselves with their needs, look at their wants, they're so much happier. Like, I'm just thinking of a client who, like something that I talk about with a lot of my clients is challenging those social norms of what does being productive in society look like. There's this expectation that you're going to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week in one job. A lot of my clients are, like, I describe them as like multi-potentialites. So they have so many interests and drives and talents. And for one of my clients, I said, well, because they were like, oh, well, I can't do it all. And I'm like, why not? I said, you can't do all of them full time, but maybe you could, work one day here, one day there. And they've changed it up, and now they're really happy. I had another client who I was speaking to them around like putting in boundaries socially with others, because they felt that they had to essentially do whatever other people requested. And when I told them that they could say no, they were like, Caitlin, you've changed my life. I didn't know that I could say no to people, and that I didn't have to just go along and do all these sorts of things. So I think a lot of my clients are really intuitive. And I say to them, you're so intuitive. You know what you need. You just need to listen to that. And when you start listening to that, that's when things are going to fall into place. You're going to feel calmer. You're going to feel more in alignment with who you are and your needs. And things are just going to be so much easier, because people are so used to, as a neurodivergent person, masking and going against their grain of who they actually are. And when they come and get support and they're told, look, you can just be yourself, it's this process of peeling off all of these different layers of and messages that they've been told their whole life. So yeah, I feel really privileged to be a part of that process with a lot of my clients.
Yeah, and
I
just
think Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to break down the term, like being intuitive. What does that mean? And for my listeners, I want you to consider that we're all intuitive when we're in our body and when we're listening to the very real nervous system pulse and the
Mm.
synaptic inputs that are mapping throughout our body. We are picking up on the breeze, the wind, the sun, social cohesion, dangers. We're in this call and response of safety and danger. It's incredibly tribal. And I think the more we practice listening and going within and, body scanning and really being present with the inner states and interoception, proprioception, all of that is massively central to our rock steady process as we're remapping and reshaping the sensory system. So that's all, I think, part of honing in and supporting our intuitive capacity. And I believe it's a skill that we can build. But just to reiterate, if you relate to this concept of masking, pretending, faking, pushing through, you've essentially become like PhD excellent at not being intuitive and going, I better not listen to this. I'll listen to that. I'll do that, not this. So instead of being internally aligned, we're externally aligned. And that can just be tremendously difficult for self-concept, self-esteem, really, really tricky, and boundaries, where do you end and I begin?
Yeah.
Teena, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so I think that Caitlin made a really good point around the what should we be doing? And when I speak with people about the social rules and the things that aren't written down, but just in the sense of, like, I'll ask someone, what does it mean to be a mother? Tell me who a mother is. Tell me who a woman is. And then even further to that, tell me what a good mother is. Tell me what a good woman is or a good wife is. And, like, people can give me a whole bunch of descriptors to sit under those labels, and that's where we draw from to decide what should I be doing, because I want to be a good mother, I want to be a good partner, I want to be a good woman, and then that can be applied across the board. What is it to be a successful person in this world? And then we try and match those descriptors. Like a good mother gets up and makes breakfast for the kids and does all of these things that I can't do so well. So does that make me a bad mother? No, not at all. But while I'm trying so hard to be a good mother as determined by society, and like those labels are we add value to them based on a whole bunch of things like Hollywood, TV, what we've seen our own mothers, fathers do. Like there is, yeah, all the information we get from the internet around, what we're supposed to be doing in any of those roles in our life. So we've got all of this information and we are trying to match the description. But when you break it down and talking to people about, well, what do you do in these roles that feels really good for you? It's very easily aligned with their own ideas of, what it is to be in any of those roles. And you can be brilliant at whatever you want to do without matching society's description of stuff, whatever it is.
So you
Like
talk, it comes
yeah,
back.
like the working, yeah.
Just going to really clarify whether we're coming at things from an intrinsically centered way, that it's about my personal values, what's important to me, what's meaningful to me, where am I getting actual dopamine, oxytocin, these feel good, uplifting connection pulses. They're real, they're in my nervous system, they're in my intuitive body. If I can collect that information intrinsically and get to know how I move in the world in my nature, it's much, much, much more powerful than trying to match extrinsic, the outer expectations, judgments. You'll notice Teena using lots of shoulds there. I should do this, or this is good, this is bad. A huge part for me anyway in our Rocksteady community is really, really holding lightly any of that positive, negative, good, bad language and shifting into a paradigm of what is and how can I support what is? How can I stay true with what is? How can I stay in my body with what is and not be abandoning myself, rejecting myself, or judging myself against these external narratives? So just noticing that there's like two different paradigms and ways of living is really quite life-changing.
Yes.
And taking things in baby steps, I think is also a really important conversation, that as we begin to let go of the mask, it can be little bits at a time. We can still retain the bits that feel safe and protective and just keep the process unfolding in a really gentle unfurling way.
I'm just getting this like image in my mind as you're talking, and it's something I talk to my clients a lot about is they need to stop trying to fit, sorry, they need to stop trying to fit into this mold that society has made them, because they're literally trying to squish themselves into this mold and
like a contortionist.
fit into it. And they're so busy focusing on all this pressure that's around them to try and fit into this mold rather than exploring and understanding themselves and sitting with themselves. And it's almost like this claustrophobia where all these things are like pushing down inwards on top of you. And I think once they feel that, like, I can just like walk out of that mold and just look at that and go, okay, well, that's, that's society, that's that kind of mold, those are all those rules. But I can actually make my own rules. I can follow my own path. I can do my own thing. And that's totally valid and totally okay. And I can be as quirky as I want. I can live a really different life compared to other people. And that's just as valid as that mold. Some people want to fit that mold, and that's totally fine. That's, that's their choice. And we're not devaluing that. But yeah, we don't have to fit into that mold. We don't have to be in pain to do that. And if that's what it feels like, then I think you really need to start thinking about whether that mold is serving you or whether you need to kind of walk on your own path and be more authentic in yourself.
Which is so important for our global collective health. I just feel like there's so much caging up of freedom of life force flow and authenticity and like letting people be loud, be quiet, have big arm movements or not. Who's it to put these rules on? But there are all of these somehow quietly agreed upon narratives of how we should speak, how we should walk, how we should talk, how we should do so many things. And we're all signing up and agreeing to this kind of invisible contract, even when it actually feels harmful towards us and our authentic individuation. So they're really, really rich inquiries. And I think, and that's actually my main reason in talking about neurodivergence, bringing it to this wider podcast community, because I know not all of my members are neurodivergent, but our global world needs this individuation. We need the neurodiversity. We actually benefit as a species from having the diversity. If we're all cloning each other and copying each other, there's a lack of health and robustness in our collective. We actually need these lateral thinking people. We need multi-potentialites. There are issues in the world and current systems that need different answers, need different thinkers. We need different personalities and different people to come to the table and use their voice. We need minorities to be more visible and more in their power. So this is a really, really important conversation, not just for our physical, personal, individual health, but for our collective health. So that's how this information's really hit me. It's like this is not a conversation for a psychiatric office. This is a conversation for every dinner table.
Yes, I totally agree. And yeah, as I said in the beginning, it's not just for neurodivergent folks. If everyone could be brave enough to be their authentic self, I think the world would be a much better place. I think everyone's mental health would be much better. I'd probably be out of a job, but that's okay. I'd be fine with that if, you know, where I was living in this world where everyone could be authentic and be happy. And yeah, I think it's just so important. And it's such a big journey for so many people, but it's so worth it.
Yeah.
It is so very complex going on this journey, because we're talking about unmasking and sort of getting back to that authentic part of ourselves. But even in that space of, you know, relaxation and wellness, there's a whole bunch of information that we're told about how you're supposed to relax. You know, think the billboards with the day spa advert and the holiday, you know, on a nice beach somewhere. You know, but for me, my absolute pinnacle of relaxation and feeling energized is having the house to myself for a whole day and just sitting there and hyper focusing on my PhD, my research. That is the activity that brings me the biggest and most long-lasting sense of self-soothing relaxation. Yeah, the beach is going to drive me insane. I'll get bored.
Yeah. Like all those neurons are just happily firing and they're working in their little collectives doing what they need to do because you're in your hyper focus. It's a very relaxing flow state.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
makes
I mean, like, the best thing
perfect
is like,
sense to me.
yeah, you know, like sitting at the beach, hyper
Beach is
focusing
so
on my
sandy.
research, or yeah. Well, I like a luxury apartment on the beach, or a nice little cabin in the bush
I,
somewhere, but
I actually
completely
love sand in my toes, and I I find the air conditioning of luxury apartments like really claustrophobic. So this is like a great example how we all have different nervous systems that I'll feel really
yeah.
comfortable in like a high-end hotel. My body will just be like, ooh. Whereas I'll love to pitch a tent and be more in the grubby, dirty nature, which feels my nervous system, I think, feels more settled.
Yeah.
And so there's no right or wrong. There are different flavors to how we engage with the world. And, you know, this is like such an interesting, great, juicy topic in and of itself. You know, how do we feel settled and relaxed? And people often think that body scanning or meditation is about full body relaxation and no thoughts. It's like, well, not really, not at all. Body scanning to me is about being present with what is, which could actually be a panic attack. And how can I gracefully support that space and be present with that and not fight, flight, freeze, fawn, reject, abandon
Yeah.
way. And meditation type practices are not about having no thoughts and suddenly being vacuous. But I do think it's about being aware of what thoughts or maps or integrations or processes are occurring and really gently holding space for that, being present with it, not hooking in. That there's a level of non-attached awareness that we're building that skill. It's not about being vacuous and void of thoughts. So that's just feeding back on some of that unhelpful conditioning, brainwashing in the outer world around what relaxation is or what meditation is, what yoga is, what spirituality is. It is what it is for you. It's an individual
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And arguably, some people could say they feel super relaxed running marathons. You know, it's very, very personal.
Yeah, and getting comfortable with what is your, like, what it is for you, and not feeling like you have to apologize for it or justify it. Yeah, it's just getting comfortable with who you are and just doing it.
Yeah. Caitlin, I'd love to invite you to share, if you wish, some words of wisdom or encouragement for people out there who might be like, gosh, I really want to read about masking or learn about it. This feels like it's tickled me. Do you have any books you would recommend or any words of wisdom for start beginning the process?
Yes, I think my cat, he's got something to share as well, it seems today. So a book that I read when I first started my unmasking journey and trying to understand myself, especially in terms of autism, is there's this amazing book called Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devon Price.
Yeah.
And yeah, I found it's quite practical as well. There's I guess the way that the book is written is that it obviously describes that experience. There's a lot of that lived experience that comes through, but also helps you to navigate that journey of how do I start to unmask and how do I start to peel off those layers. So if you're like identify as autistic, or you're kind of on that journey trying to explore that, I would highly recommend that. I find particularly for a lot of my autistic clients that a great way that they learn about themselves is through resonating with other people's stories. So I think seeking out like even just like going online, trying to find some people like advocates or other people with lived experience, and listening to their stories and how they process things can be really helpful. And there's all sorts of people I guess out there.
Yeah,
You're welcome to
I just
listen.
I just want to clarify, probably, I think you're referring to like podcasts or books written by neurodivergent people, as opposed to
Yes.
entering the wild west of the interworld web, where it can actually be a bit of a psychologically boundary confusing space. So just to be really aware of, there can be the psychological and physiological harm that comes up if you're in groups that just complain about symptoms all the time, if they're really in the judgment space, if they're in the labeling and identifying with medicalization, pathologizing any of this conversation. For us, the neurodiversity affirming model is something to be very aware of. Find neurodiversity affirming therapists, find neurodiversity affirming groups, peers. It's just a massive world of difference. And I would definitely recommend reading people's real lived stories, getting the inner experience instead of reading external psychiatry, the external observer experience. Is just so different. And yes, by listening to stories, you may see parts of yourself and also not see parts of yourself. And that's all useful for your own becoming.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you, Joe. I think that's a really good point, because I guess online people are going to be at different stages of their journey. And I can tell you that on my journey, there were parts that it was dark and it was hard. And, I'm hoping I'm on the other side now. So yeah, I think it is, I don't know, it's all a bit of a process. It, goes in cycles. But
Depends on the day. Blah.
yeah, but I think that's a really good point, that if you're in that really vulnerable space, you want to be engaging in content where people are kind of on that other side and they do have that balanced perspective. And it's okay for people to struggle, and for some people they express that online, and that's totally valid. But for some people that are experiencing difficulty with their mental health and that processing, then obviously that's not going to be really helpful for them when they're in that space necessarily.
Yeah. And Teena, any encouragement, words of wisdom, recommendations? You can also plug your Divergent Dialogue Substack podcast as well, if you'd like.
Oh yes, thank you. So Caitlin's better at knowing the URLs and all that kind of stuff than I am. But I think that words of wisdom would be that just take a step. It's okay to be thinking about it and not do anything just yet. It's okay to take a little step and start exploring, safe podcasts and, like online groups that are talking about this stuff in a positive way to understand it. It's okay to start by listening before you decide to start doing. And it's also okay when you're really aware of your masking and how you're masking, where you're masking, why, all of these things, it is still okay for you to say that actually, I know I'm doing this, but I'm going to keep doing it in this space. We talk a lot about unmasking, which is a very, very important conversation to have. But I think that it's keeping it balanced and letting people know that you're not wrong if you choose to keep masking in certain situations because you're trying to be effective and get your needs met in that workspace or whatever it might be. So I think that my words of wisdom would be it is your journey, and they are your choices to make.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and listeners, I hope you've been inspired to inquire, because I think it's probably pretty safe to say all humans at some level are masking and pushing through and faking it and pretending at certain times in the day. And I think the more we have choice in that, the much, much more power we have, more energy we reclaim, and I think when I go back to rewind the clock to some of my younger days, I did have inexplicable exhaustion, like really, really heavy fatigue. And it wasn't really explainable, and no one could explain it to me. And I now look back and think it was probably heavy masking. Like I just had no words for it, no language for it. And all that effort of trying to belong, feel safe, fit in, and doing well, like, at face value, it would have appeared that I was very well networked and connected and whatever, but on the inside feeling vacuous and just feeling unseen, unmet, dissatisfied, discontent, this like yearning and curiosity and this soulful stuff that was just untouched. So it really, really is so worth it. I think it's just so worth it.
Yeah, I was just thinking that I guess it's the first step is to really tune into yourself and to understand yourself and to go within. That's if if you don't understand what's behind the mask, then it's hard to take it off.
Yep. So for everybody listening, may it be a genuinely gentle and safe process for you, because these are protections and they're protecting something. And I think that's what Caitlin's just alluding to. How can we keep the protection but use a different strategy that retains authenticity and keeps us in our body? Thank you so much. So Divergent Dialogues, you can look that up on Substack, and I'll pop some links in as well below. Thank you so much, Teena, Caitlin. Really enjoyed this conversation and your company. And it's a little bye for now. So I'm Joey Remenyi from seekingbalance.com.au, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.